Some rules were never meant to be broken. Samantha Hayes whispered to herself as she stepped out of the taxi onto the cobblestone driveway, her heels clicking against the wet stones, the air heavy with the scent of rain and expensive perfume from the surrounding gardens. The mansion loomed above her, lights flickering through tall windows, shadows stretching across the ornate stone walls, each step echoing like a warning through the silent night. Julian Blackwood appeared at the top of the staircase, silhouetted against the warm glow of the chandelier, his posture rigid, hands clasped behind his back, eyes sharp as they traced her every move. Samantha felt the weight of the house, the unspoken tension in the air, and yet she moved forward with a confidence that made the marble floor beneath her feel almost like solid ground despite the storm brewing in her chest. She reached the grand entrance, the doors opening silently at her touch, revealing the vast hall lined with golden-framed portraits and towering pillars, the echoes of history pressing in on every side. Julian's voice cut through the stillness, smooth, calm, and dangerous in its authority. "Welcome, Samantha. I hope you understand what's expected here." She tilted her head, letting a faint smile brush across her lips, unafraid, meeting his gaze directly. "I'm here to learn, but not to follow blindly." The tension between them pulsed like electricity, the air thick with unspoken challenges. As Samantha stepped further into the house, noticing the intricate patterns on the floors, the delicate chandeliers swaying slightly above, casting fractured light across the grand hall. Julian descended the staircase slowly, each step deliberate, the sound resonating against the walls, a silent assertion of his control over the space. Samantha's eyes scanned the room, catching the reflection of her own determination in the polished surfaces, and she realized that her first impression mattered, the rules written in stone, yet she was willing to test them. Julian stopped a few feet away, the distance deliberate, his presence overwhelming yet somehow magnetic. "You think you can handle this place?" he asked, his tone carrying a mix of curiosity and warning. Samantha's smile widened, a spark of defiance lighting her face. "I don't just handle things. I face them." He studied her, the tension crackling between them like a storm waiting to break, the subtle shift in the room noticeable, as if the walls themselves held their breath. Shadows danced across Julian's sharp features as the chandelier light flickered, highlighting the hard lines of control he exuded, while Samantha's steady gaze met his, unblinking, filled with a quiet courage that challenged the rules she had just been warned about. The night stretched ahead, filled with unspoken challenges and tests, each second a measure of the silent power struggle between them. Yet beneath it all, an undercurrent of mutual respect and fascination began to take shape, hinting that this encounter would mark the beginning of something neither could have anticipated. Every movement, every glance, every breath carried the weight of anticipation, and as the heavy doors closed behind her, sealing her into Julian's world, Samantha felt a thrill of both fear and excitement, knowing that the game had only just begun. The morning light streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, casting long shadows across the marble floors, each beam catching the dust particles that floated like tiny stars suspended in air. Samantha Hayes moved with purpose, carrying a silver tray of freshly brewed coffee, her reflection mirrored in the polished surfaces, alert to every creak in the floorboards, every subtle shift in the atmosphere. Julian Blackwood sat behind his large oak desk, the weight of the room and his presence pressing against her awareness, his eyes scanning documents, yet flicking toward her with a quiet intensity that made her pulse quicken. She placed the tray down carefully, the cups perfectly aligned, yet she could feel the energy crackling between them, unspoken challenges and untested boundaries that hung like a taut wire in the air. He lifted his gaze slowly, studying her with a measured patience, the slight raise of an eyebrow conveying both amusement and warning. "You handled yesterday well," he remarked, voice calm, yet carrying a power that demanded attention. Samantha tilted her head, letting the corners of her mouth lift just slightly, a hint of defiance threading through her composed exterior. "I try to learn fast, but I also try to see things differently," she replied, her tone steady, eyes unwavering, daring him to respond. Julian leaned back, hands steepled together, the room around them filled with the quiet hum of tension and anticipation. the large chandelier above casting fractured patterns on the polished floor. Every detail of the room, the portraits lining the walls, the heavy drapes, the intricate molding, seemed to hold its breath, reflecting the silent duel unfolding. Samantha moved toward the window, drawing the curtains slightly aside, letting the morning sun fall across the patterned carpet, illuminating her stance, revealing a determination that seemed almost palpable. Julian's gaze followed her every movement, an internal conflict dancing behind the controlled exterior, caught between admiration and the urge to assert command. The clock on the wall ticked with a rhythmic precision, marking the seconds that stretched between them, moments charged with unspoken dialogue, every gesture weighted with significance. Samantha's hand lingered on the curtain, a subtle challenge, a question unasked yet felt, and Julian's eyes met hers, acknowledging the spark without conceding an inch of authority. The tension held, balanced on the knife edge of curiosity and respect, the silence of the grand hall filled only by the faint rustle of silk and the distant chime of a passing clock, signaling that this was only the beginning of a day that would test patience, intellect, and the unspoken understanding that both were learning, observing, and adjusting to the uncharted territory between control and defiance. Samantha's lips curved in a barely perceptible smile, aware of the magnetic pull between them, the silent dance of power and perspective, and Julian's stance softened just slightly, a hint of intrigue threading through the carefully constructed barrier, promising that the unfolding hours would hold challenges neither had anticipated and that each encounter would reveal new facets of understanding, strategy, and the quiet respect growing beneath the surface of authority and independence. The afternoon sun filtered through the tall windows, scattering light across the polished hardwood floors, making the intricate patterns shimmer faintly as Samantha Hayes moved carefully through the library, her footsteps silent yet deliberate. Julian Blackwood was seated in the leather armchair near the fireplace, fingers steepled, watching her with a gaze that was both evaluating and quietly impressed, the air between them charged with an unspoken tension. Samantha reached for a book on the shelf, her hand brushing against the spine, and she could feel the weight of his eyes following every motion, a silent measurement of poise, attention, and the subtle defiance that lingered in her stance. She pulled the book down slowly, the sound of its pages shifting almost imperceptible yet echoing in the quiet room, and Julian's lips pressed together in a line of both restraint and curiosity, as though he were challenging himself not to react too quickly. "You take your work seriously," he said, voice calm, carrying a note of acknowledgement that made her pause just slightly, considering her response. Samantha met his gaze evenly, a quiet smile on her lips. "I take responsibility seriously. The rest is secondary," she replied, her voice steady, measured, and deliberate, revealing a mind attuned to observation and analysis, qualities he had already begun to respect silently. The room seemed to hold its breath, the grand chandelier above casting light that danced across the floor in fractured patterns, shadows weaving around them like silent spectators. Samantha moved toward the desk, laying the book down with careful precision, noting how Julian's posture shifted subtly as he studied her, an unspoken conversation threading between the gestures, glances, and small movements that carried far more weight than words ever could. The large windows showed the late afternoon light fading, the shadows stretching longer across the walls, wrapping the room in a gentle tension that was both comfortable and charged, a paradox neither could ignore. Julian leaned forward, slightly, resting his elbows on the armrests, the air between them thick with quiet energy, anticipation, and the steady pull of intellectual and emotional challenge, each recognizing the subtle power the other wielded within the confines of this room. Samantha straightened, glancing briefly at the fireplace, the flames flickering and throwing light on Julian's expression, revealing glimpses of contemplation, interest, and something she could not quite name, yet felt as an undercurrent pulling her attention and thoughts toward him. She spoke, calm, precise, and measured. "There is much to learn here, and I intend to see it all." And Julian's gaze softened imperceptibly, a small nod acknowledging her determination, the silent understanding between them growing, threaded with curiosity, challenge, and the beginnings of mutual respect. The clock ticked, The sun continued its slow descent, and the room, filled with history, light, and the silent rhythm of interaction, became the stage for an intricate game of perception, patience, and measured movement, each aware that the day had only deepened the complexity of their connection, leaving both anticipating what the evening would reveal. Evening settled over the mansion, painting the sky in hues of deep orange and soft violet, and Samantha Hayes moved through the vast corridors with a careful grace, her steps echoing lightly against the polished floors. Julian Blackwood appeared at the doorway of the study, the warm lamplight highlighting the sharp lines of his face, his posture composed yet charged with an intensity that seemed to fill the room. Samantha paused, letting her eyes drift over the detailed carvings on the walls and the rows of books lining the shelves, each one a fragment of history and taste, evidence of Julian's meticulous attention to detail. He observed her, his expression a mixture of curiosity and quiet admiration, noting how she carried herself, how she regarded the space with both respect and a subtle defiance. "You notice everything," he stated softly, almost a comment to himself, yet deliberately aimed at her, his tone neutral but carrying a weight that made her aware of the unspoken dynamics in the room. Samantha's lips curved in a faint smile, meeting his gaze with calm confidence. "Observation is part of understanding, and understanding is how one navigates a new world," she replied, her voice steady, composed, each word deliberate. Julian leaned slightly against the doorframe, his arms crossed, absorbing her response, the interplay between them a silent conversation layered with meaning. The room was quiet, save for the gentle tick of the antique clock on the mantelpiece, the shadows stretching across the walls as the evening deepened, giving the space a cinematic quality, as though the walls themselves were holding their breath. Samantha moved toward a small table with a decanter and glasses, pouring a measure of water with precise movements, her attention never leaving Julian, the air around them filled with anticipation, a subtle tension woven into every glance and gesture. He approached, stopping a careful distance away, the light catching the edge of his tailored suit, the presence commanding yet restrained, and she felt the weight of his focus like a tangible force. The evening brings quiet moments, but they are as revealing as the loud ones, Julian observed, tone calm, insightful, and Samantha nodded slightly, understanding the layers beneath his words, the balance of power and perception, the subtle negotiation of authority and independence unfolding without explicit declaration. Outside, the last light of day faded, the mansion glowing softly against the darkening sky, casting reflections on the polished floors, the warmth of the lamps mingling with the cooling air, a space charged with intellectual and emotional energy. Samantha placed the glass back gently, her gaze meeting Julian's with a composed intensity, a silent acknowledgement that the evening had become another measure of understanding, observation, and the growing, intricate dynamic between them, leaving both aware that each interaction added depth to a connection neither had yet fully mapped, but both felt compelling and unavoidable. Night had fully descended over the estate, and Samantha Hayes found herself walking along the sweeping staircase, the polished wood reflecting the soft golden glow of the wall sconces. Julian Blackwood waited at the base, his silhouette framed by the faint moonlight spilling through the grand windows, the quiet authority in his stance as commanding as the room itself. She descended slowly, each step deliberate, feeling the unspoken tension tighten and loosen with each movement, a rhythm dictated by observation and subtle challenge. Julian's eyes followed her, noting the confidence in her posture, the steady cadence of her descent, and a flicker of curiosity crossed his otherwise composed expression, a silent acknowledgement of her poise and attention to detail. The hall seemed to hold its breath, the distant sound of a clock ticking merging with the soft hum of the night, creating a delicate backdrop for the silent dialogue unfolding between them. Samantha reached the landing, pausing briefly, her gaze sweeping over the large portraits of past generations, the intricate moldings, and the ornate furnishings, each element a testament to legacy and authority. Julian's voice broke the quiet, measured and calm. "You move through this house as though it speaks to you." And Samantha met his gaze steadily, replying with a subtle confidence. "It tells stories if you listen closely, and I intend to hear them all." A quiet smile touched his lips, almost imperceptible, as he noted the balance of respect and individuality she brought into the space, the subtle dance of challenge and observation threading through their interaction. She continued across the hall, adjusting a vase slightly, testing boundaries, while Julian's attention never wavered, the energy between them charged yet controlled, a careful exchange of perception and presence. Outside, the night air pressed softly against the tall windows, a cool breeze carrying the scent of the gardens into the hall, mingling with the warmth of the interior lights, heightening the cinematic quality of the moment. Samantha paused by the fireplace, observing the flicker of flame casting dancing shadows across Julian's features, each movement and glance communicating unspoken dialogue, the quiet ebb and flow of authority, insight, and mutual recognition. Julian leaned forward slightly, resting one hand on the arm of the chair, his eyes holding hers, silently measuring thought against thought, presence against presence, and Samantha felt the intricate balance of attention, observation, and restrained power, aware that each moment deepened their understanding of one another. The room remained enveloped in a quiet tension, the soft illumination highlighting the subtle changes in expression, the shifts in posture, and the gentle exchange of intellect and perception that neither needed words to convey. Samantha's subtle smile lingered, an unspoken acknowledgement of the careful dance between control and curiosity, and Julian's steady gaze reflected a growing intrigue, a shared awareness that the night had revealed layers of character, understanding, and anticipation that would continue to unfold with every careful step they took in the unfolding evening. The night deepened, and Samantha Hayes lingered in the drawing room, the soft glow of the lamps casting delicate shadows across the high ceilings and ornate moldings, each corner of the room holding quiet history and subtle tension. Julian Blackwood entered from the adjoining hallway, his presence commanding yet measured, eyes scanning the space before settling on her with a focus that seemed to weigh every movement she made. Samantha shifted slightly, adjusting a stack of papers on the polished mahogany table, her attention to detail a quiet assertion of competence and observation, a subtle challenge woven into her gestures. Julian approached, his footsteps soft against the thick carpet, the flickering light accentuating the sharp angles of his features, the controlled rhythm of his presence creating a magnetic pull across the room. "You adapt quickly," he observed, voice calm, yet carrying an undercurrent of authority and curiosity, the words simple yet layered with acknowledgement of her capability and insight. Samantha met his gaze steadily, her expression composed. "Adaptation is essential when understanding a new environment," she replied, the tone precise, deliberate, and confident, revealing both respect and independence. The room held its breath, shadows stretching across the walls as the evening progressed, the interplay of light and form framing the nuanced dialogue of glances, gestures, and subtle expressions that communicated more than words ever could. Julian rested a hand lightly on the back of a chair, eyes following her movements, noting the balance of focus, determination, and quiet defiance, a dance of intellect and presence unfolding silently yet palpably. Samantha moved toward the fireplace, the flames flickering, casting dynamic patterns across the room, her figure illuminated against the warm light, the careful alignment of objects and her poised movements creating a rhythm that was both methodical and engaging. Julian's attention remained fixed, the subtle acknowledgement of her choices reflecting an unspoken understanding, a growing recognition of skill and composure intertwined with the controlled tension between them. She paused, her gaze drifting to the intricate artwork lining the walls, absorbing details, the quality of observation becoming a dialogue in itself, a testament to her awareness and intentionality in each action. Julian stepped closer, maintaining a measured distance, the weight of his presence felt without intrusion, a silent conversation of authority and acknowledgement threading through the space. The soft hum of the night, the occasional rustle of the curtains, and the muted reflections in the polished surfaces created a layered soundscape, amplifying the cinematic quality of the moment, the depth of interaction, and the electric subtlety of mutual observation. Samantha's calm smile held a quiet defiance, a recognition of the growing understanding and unspoken respect between them, and Julian's eyes softened imperceptibly, a subtle acknowledgement of the complexity and intrigue that her presence brought into the carefully ordered environment. Each second stretched with anticipation, every gesture weighed with meaning, the room alive with the silent rhythm of perception, patience, and connection, setting the stage for discoveries and exchanges that would shape the unfolding hours with both careful calculation and subtle intrigue. The first hints of midnight cast a silver glow through the tall windows, and Samantha Hayes moved silently through the hallway, each step measured, deliberate, her eyes tracing the contours of the expansive space, the intricate moldings, and the soft shadows that danced across the walls. Julian Blackwood appeared near the entrance to the sitting room, his posture commanding yet composed, hands resting lightly at his sides, his eyes following her movements with a subtle intensity that made the air feel charged without a single word spoken. Samantha paused, her hand grazing the surface of a polished console, noting the reflections of the lamps in the darkened hallway and the faint flicker of the moonlight beyond the glass, a quiet observance that spoke to her attention and awareness of the space around her. Julian's voice cut through the stillness, low and precise. "The house seems different at this hour," and Samantha turned slightly, meeting his gaze evenly, her expression calm and confident. It reveals its character when the world is still, allowing observation and understanding to become clearer. He nodded, the shadowed corners of his face softening slightly as he acknowledged the insight in her words, the silent interplay between authority and perspective threading through the quiet room. Samantha continued across the floor, her movements fluid, adjusting a vase, aligning books, each gesture purposeful, demonstrating care, precision, and a subtle defiance that commanded attention while remaining respectful of the environment. Julian stepped closer, his footsteps deliberate on the thick carpet, the faint sound resonating in the quiet space. And yet there was a rhythm to the interaction, a careful balance of observation, awareness, and mutual acknowledgement of presence. The fireplace flickered behind him, casting long shadows that wove around them, the light illuminating the nuanced expressions, the almost imperceptible shifts of posture that carried meaning far beyond the spoken word. Samantha glanced at him briefly, a subtle lift of her brow, a silent challenge that acknowledged the unspoken dialogue unfolding between them, and Julian's eyes reflected both curiosity and appreciation, the careful recognition of competence, awareness, and individuality intertwining in the shared space. The room seemed to hold its breath, the faint ticking of a distant clock marking the passage of time, the night itself a canvas upon which the delicate dance of perception and understanding painted itself with light, shadow, and measured gestures. Samantha's calm smile remained, an acknowledgement of the growing connection, subtle yet potent, and Julian's posture softened just slightly, a quiet recognition of the depth and intricacy she brought into the space. Each movement, glance, and measured breath created a layered conversation, a balance of power, respect, and emerging trust, the night stretching on, filled with anticipation and the silent promise that every interaction would continue to reveal new facets of awareness, understanding, and careful navigation within the unfolding relationship. The first hints of dawn began to filter through the tall windows, casting a gentle glow across the grand hall, and Samantha Hayes moved with measured steps, her senses attuned to every detail, every shadow, every flicker of light that shifted across the polished floors. Julian Blackwood stood near the staircase, the early light tracing the sharp angles of his face, his posture relaxed yet commanding, his presence filling the space without a word. Samantha paused, letting her eyes drift over the intricate woodwork, the glimmering chandeliers, and the subtle reflections of the room in the polished surfaces, each element a testament to legacy and attention to detail, and she understood the quiet weight of the environment she had entered. Julian's voice broke the silence, calm, precise, and weighted with observation. "You have learned quickly, and yet there is more to perceive." And Samantha met his gaze evenly, her expression composed, carrying a quiet confidence and the awareness of the subtle power dynamic threading between them. She continued to move across the room, adjusting a few objects, aligning books and decorative items with care, demonstrating competence and attention while maintaining an independence that he had come to recognize. Julian stepped forward, closing the distance slightly, his eyes holding hers with a mixture of assessment and intrigue, noting the balance of obedience, initiative, and subtle challenge in her actions. The fireplace flickered, casting dynamic shadows that danced across the walls and the floor, highlighting the nuances of posture, gaze, and expression that communicated a layered conversation without words. Samantha's lips curved in a faint smile, acknowledging the silent dialogue, and Julian's eyes softened imperceptibly, recognizing the depth of understanding and awareness she had cultivated in the space. Outside, the sky lightened with the approach of morning, and the mansion seemed to shift subtly with the changing illumination, the atmosphere thick with anticipation, observation, and measured exchange of presence. Samantha paused by the windows, watching the interplay of light and shadow, and Julian remained a careful step behind, each aware of the delicate balance between guidance, autonomy, and the growing trust that had emerged. The quiet hum of the house, the distant rustle of the morning breeze, and the reflective surfaces creating fractured light combined to form a cinematic backdrop, framing each subtle gesture and glance with clarity and tension. Samantha turned her gaze toward Julian, steady and observant, an acknowledgement passing silently between them of the complexity of the interaction and the mutual respect that had been established. Every breath, every movement, every measured glance carried meaning, a final understanding that the early morning light revealed layers of connection, awareness, and the potential for shared insight, leaving both conscious of the subtle rhythm and anticipation that would guide the unfolding day. The mansion itself a witness to the quiet evolution of perception, presence, and an unspoken bond that had grown between them through the night and into the first hours of dawn. The morning had fully arrived, soft golden light spilling across the grand hall and filtering through the tall windows, casting intricate patterns on the polished marble floors, and Samantha Hayes walked with a deliberate calm, each step measured as she observed the quiet beauty of the estate. Julian Blackwood stood near the center of the room, his posture composed and commanding, the light tracing the sharp lines of his face and the subtle movements of his hands as he regarded her with thoughtful consideration. Samantha paused near the ornate staircase, taking in the intricate woodwork and the details of the furnishings, her awareness heightened by the lessons of the past hours, each gesture and glance now loaded with understanding and perception. Julian's voice broke the silence, steady and measured. "You have mastered observation, yet the house still holds surprises." And Samantha met his gaze with quiet confidence. "Every space tells its own story, and I intend to read them all carefully," she replied, her tone deliberate and even, a subtle blend of respect, insight, and independence threading through her words. The grand chandelier above cast fractured light across the walls, highlighting the delicate shadows that moved with the rhythm of the morning, the atmosphere charged with silent acknowledgement and shared understanding. Samantha adjusted a few items on a nearby console, the meticulous alignment reflecting both her careful attention and the emerging balance between initiative and awareness, and Julian's eyes followed her every movement, noting the poise, control, and subtle assertion of individuality she displayed. The air seemed to hold its breath, filled only with the soft ticking of the distant clock, the slight rustle of fabric, and the ambient sounds of a mansion waking slowly to a new day. The cinematic quality of the environment framing every nuanced exchange of presence, observation, and interaction. Julian stepped forward, maintaining a respectful distance, his eyes reflecting appreciation and acknowledgement for the skill, insight, and quiet confidence Samantha had demonstrated, a silent affirmation of the evolving connection and mutual understanding between them. Samantha's subtle smile conveyed recognition of the unspoken dialogue, the layered perceptions, and the careful balance of authority, independence, and respect that had developed, and Julian's posture softened just slightly, the hint of intrigue and consideration threading through his measured composure. The light shifted as the sun rose higher, illuminating the room in warm hues, the reflections dancing on polished surfaces, and the mansion itself seemed to breathe with the quiet rhythm of awareness, observation, and the intricate interplay of presence and perception. Every gesture, Every glance, every small measured action became part of a larger dialogue, a silent conversation that spoke to understanding, insight, and the delicate equilibrium achieved between them. Samantha turned to acknowledge Julian with a nod, the morning light highlighting the depth of attention and awareness they had cultivated together, leaving a sense of anticipation and readiness for what the day would bring. The mansion standing as a witness to the quiet evolution of mutual respect, observation, and connection that had taken root over the past hours, promising further discovery and understanding with each carefully navigated moment.